Welcome to the Expat Edge with Marcus and Matt, where we answer your questions about becoming an expat to help you thrive abroad.
Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of the Expat Edge. Today we're going to be talking about why you need to know the local language if you're living abroad. Marcus, you and I, we've lived abroad. You continue to live abroad. I'm currently in Texas. But I think one of the most underrated aspects of living abroad is learning and knowing the local language of where you live. Unfortunately, Americans have the worst reputation for not knowing the local language, no matter how easy or difficult that language may be. But what are some of the reasons why you think that if you're going to live abroad, you need to know the local language?
I would say the first and most important for me, in my perspective, is just connecting with the local people. And that doesn't mean that you know the language perfectly, because like, let's say you're at a market or a store, or you're in town, or maybe you're at the bus, train station or something, and you need some kind of, you need some help or assistance with something. Just trying to speak the language and maybe, picking up a few words here and there will really, maybe you won't get the help that you need in that situation as much as, as you imagine it, like, oh, now he's going to tell me and I'm going to understand everything. But I've been in some situations where I've tried to start speaking the local language and they've known English better than I did, but they appreciate the effort.
Right. Well, so I think,
and that connects you with the local people, and you get some sympathy, you get help when maybe if you hadn't tried, they'd just be like, he's a foreigner. So that's my experience.
What I always tell people is that, think about yourself. If you are nervous about speaking a foreign language, imagine someone comes up to you and starts speaking to you in a foreign language. Are you going to be, wanting to speak that foreign language, or are you going to try to just say, oh, I don't speak English, or whatever, your language is? But if you walk up to that person and you speak in their language, but really bad, they're going to be much more willing to speak English with you because you've already shown that you don't really know, but you're trying. And for Americans, usually, we're going to speak the language much worse than they're going to speak English. Even shopkeepers in the middle of nowhere are going to speak, enough to say like tomatoes, $5, whatever. But if you just show that you're making an attempt to learn their language, they're going to be so much more willing to try to use their English. Whereas if you approach them in English and they don't understand, they just freeze up, because you're going to go up to them in English and you're going to be very confident in the way you ask. Like, how much did the potatoes cost? And they just freeze up. But if you start the conversation by, asking them very obviously unconfidently how much the potatoes cost in their local language, immediately the dynamic in the conversation changes and they're willing to.
The walls fall away, and it's like, okay, this guy doesn't know much of my language. I guess, my English is probably not so bad compared to his, or to his, knowledge of the local language abilities. So, right. Yes, that's the main thing for me.
Right.
Yeah.
And I also think, we talk about going to the market, whatever. Yeah, of course you're going to get a lot better prices on things, and you're not going to get ripped off all the time. A lot of people complain when they go to different countries that they get ripped off. Well, in my opinion, they don't really get ripped off. It's honestly just ignorance of the local culture. Like, if you don't know how things work and you don't know how much things cost, why is that person, ripping you off? Especially if you're making no effort to, try to communicate in their language.
Well, and then later you find out, I could have gotten it for less over here. But, if you spoke some of the local language, maybe you would have, haggled a bit or try. That's what I was saying about the sympathy, right? If I've done this in Turkey where I've tried to use the local language, and they're like, okay, I'll give it to you for a discount, or maybe it's not a discount, but at least they drop the price that they started with.
Right.
So I think that effort is rewarded in many cases.
Right. And so so far we've been kind of talking about what I would call more touristic type situations. But when you become an expat in another country, literally everything you do in your daily life, outside of maybe work, because you're probably going to be, if you're working in a foreign country, most of your colleagues will probably speak English. But outside of work, I mean, every situation you're going to need, some sort of language abilities, or you're going to encounter difficulties. Of course, there's some exceptions, right? Like in the Netherlands, everyone speaks English. It's probably going to be really hard to learn Dutch. Same in Sweden, same in Dubai. I mean, if you learn Arabic in Dubai, I'm sure it's going to help, but it's not going to help like learning Turkish in Turkey.
One example that I want to share is that when expats are thinking of going abroad and they're trying to, choose a destination that fits them, one of the main factors is their budget, right? So they're conscious about how much a foreign country will cost them to live, per month or whatever. And so it's worth noting that if you know the local language, you'll probably be paying, you'll know those better deals, and you'll be able to see them and to negotiate, haggle if you're out and about, because you can kind of to some degree integrate with the locals, and the locals may share some deals or secrets or something of that area, but also what you're paying for, right? And if you didn't know the language, then you're really going to be expected to pay more, because somebody has to translate and market that to you. So I've seen some expats, they're budget conscious, and you need to take that into account. If that's a major factor for you choosing a destination, then you may want to understand that if you go to that destination not knowing the local language, you'll probably pay more, because the number of people providing those services or goods who know English are much fewer than the local language.
Well, what's always kind of surprised me, Marcus, is that there's always this huge focus on how much it costs to live in some other country when people are making the decision, but nobody's really thinking about what is the local culture like. And this is maybe a topic for another video, but it always has surprised me that there's always a lot of hype for low cost of living countries where the languages are very, very hard.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you think about,
right.
Okay, if you're an American and you move to Cambodia because it's really cheap to live, there's great things about Cambodia, I'm sure. But the fact that you're never going to learn the language and very few people speak English means you're not even really taking advantage of all of the low cost of living. I mean, I think there are other countries that are overlooked. I mean, you could live some places in the United States for $1,500 a month with no real problems, other than healthcare. And again, we've gotten into that all the time. But you can't live like a local if you don't speak the local language, even at just a basic level. And a lot of people, they get talking about how they live in this third world country and they live like a local there and it's really cheap, this, that, and the other thing. And I always just kind of laugh and I think, well, if you don't speak Cambodian, how can you be living like a local in Cambodia?
Yeah, I presume that they're paying a little bit more per month for rent, for all those services catered towards and that's fine. But you just, if you know the local language, you know the differences.
Right. One of the other, great reasons to know the local language is it allows you to understand the culture. I know in almost every country,
sure.
When you're living in another country, you're going to encounter cultural differences. And no matter how you kind of understand the situation and look at it, you're always going to look at it through the lens of your own culture and language. And I think it becomes very hard to kind of accept some of the cultural differences. I saw this, a lot with people who've lived in Dubai, just for example. If one goes to Dubai, you go there and you see basically a Western city in the desert, right? Like everybody speaks English well. There's all of these Western brands. It looks quite Western. But then obviously there's cultural differences. And people just expect these people act like Western people. It looks like, the Western world and Western Europe. Why are there why are things so different? And people get so frustrated. But I think if you probably understood the language, if you spoke Arabic and understood the culture, you would have a very different outlook on the situation, or at least you would understand why things are done a certain way. And I at least noticed that in Russia, and it goes the other way as well. Like when I went to Russia the first time, it felt like an alien world. Like everything was so different than the West. But then once you understand most of the language and you start to begin to understand the culture as much as you can of the Russian culture, then you see that it's not really that much different. But it also allows you to kind of process why things are happening the way they happen and what are the reasons for some of the difficulties or troubles that you encounter that people struggle with in any country.
When I studied Russian, for example, even the construction of the language of a sentence, like you would start to understand like, oh, why would they say it this way? And if you translate it directly into English, it sounds funny, right? So you're like, oh, that's kind of weird. And then you get to know the culture a little bit more and you think, oh, that's why, they would say it with this construction, the words backwards, or this preposition, or so sometimes just the language can show you a different aspect of the way that the culture sees things. So that's what I thought was kind of fascinating by knowing or studying the local language. But there are some countries where you could get by much easier than others, of course, without knowing the local language, right?
Well, I brought Sweden and Netherlands.
In a few videos right, and the English speaking. Oh, so I haven't been to Dubai. You recently went, and I'm sure you can get by just fine.
Yeah.
But if you're looking for a destination where you're gonna spend a considerable amount of time, then you have to know something in the language. Again, you may not get to a native speaking level, but I would say even like a B2, like pre-intermediate,
right,
where you can communicate with the locals when you do your daily tasks. That will significantly decrease the amount of stress that you have on a daily basis, because you have to.
Just the level of stress that people must have if they cannot understand anything that's going on around them.
Right.
Right. Blows my mind. On vacation it can get stressful if you're trying to figure something out and somebody's not able to speak English or communicate with you. Imagine if your whole life was in that type of scenario. How people do it, it blows my mind.
I think those are the main reasons you would want to at least dive into some of the language. You'll get to know the culture. You'll show respect for the locals. You'll integrate somewhat, probably not completely, into the local culture, and you will probably gain some friends, find some friends and people that you can count on for certain things. If you need assistance, I'm sure some local people will say, if you need some help, come around and I'll help you out. And that's one of the best things about being in a new place.
Right.
Meeting those people.
Right. So we hope you enjoyed the video. Let us know what you think in the comments below, and we'll see you next time.
This was the Expat Edge with Matt and Marcus. We hope you enjoyed the video. Visit theexpatedge.com for even more content that will help you thrive abroad. You can submit your ideas for video topics and sign up for free at theexpatedge.com. See you there.